Yeah, we're in Daniel chapter 1, which you can find on page 884 in the Red Bibles. And I should preface before I read, there are lots of funky names in this, so have grace as I stumble through. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, king of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men of your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters of his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of the king Cyrus. This is the word of the Lord.
Well, good afternoon to everybody. It's great to be with you. And anyone joining us online, great to have you with us as we go to the second in our series on Daniel, starting in chapter 1 today. So that's we did chapter 7 last week. Do catch up if you want to. But let me pray for us before we dive in. Lord, we thank you that it is your Spirit by which these words were written. So would you fill us with your presence now to understand what you're calling us to today? Amen. I wonder if you have ever had a bad boss. No HT staff members putting their hands up, so that's good. Wonder if you've ever had a bad boss. Most of us, if you've worked for very long. We will have a bad boss at some point. My dad had a boss once who only gave him one single day off in the entire year. One day. It gets worse. That year included the birth of my brother. And this boss didn't allow my dad off work on the day that my brother was born. Then, at the end of the year, when my dad left the job, this boss presented my dad with, number one, a portrait of himself, which he had signed himself, and a fancy pen on which he had engraved his own name. Wow. I wonder if you've ever had a bad boss. You might think that's a bit of an odd place to start, but I actually think it's a good place, because the whole of the book of Daniel is an exploration of what it looks like to live under kind of bad authorities, if you like. Is it possible for a follower of God, a follower of Yahweh, to be faithful even while they're living in a society that is ungodly and doesn't honor God, even while living under authorities who don't know the Lord, don't honor God? And the book explores this in the first half through a series of stories, a series of conundrums that Daniel and his friends face. And it really does start with a great one. There's a real humdinger of a conundrum at the beginning of this. Maybe if you're in home group later this week, you can ask this question. If an authoritarian state invaded your country, desecrated your place of worship, then kidnapped you and forced you into labor, would you accept a job in their head office, giving them advice every day? That is essentially the situation that Daniel faces. A story of Daniel and his friends who are affectionately known as Rak, Shak, and Benny. The story is set in exile. So it's probably around the year 605 BC, or maybe a little bit after, when Nebuchadnezzar, who was the then prince of Babylon, defeated the superpower of the day, Egypt, and subjugated the whole region, including Judah, and he sacked Jerusalem, deporting many of its people to the capital, Babylon. So our story begins in quite a bad place. On top of losing families, mourning the devastation of their country, their place of worship, Daniel and co. find themselves essentially as trafficked miners, and they have now been forced into a sort of civil service fast-track training program that is hell-bent on turning them into a model Babylonian citizens to serve the empire. They've been isolated as a cohort for kind of cultural molding. They're kept in dependency on the state. Their futures are in balance. They are subject to rigorous enculturation. They have to learn the language, the philosophies, read all the religious texts of the day. And on top of that, they are renamed. Their names, their Hebrew names, which refer to God, the God of Israel, are replaced with Babylonian names, which refer to the gods of Babylon. One commentary on this passage puts it really well. I like this. It says, the Babylonian king was not content simply to capture the bodies of those who had been deported from Judea. He was also set on capturing their hearts and minds as well. Wasn't content just to have their services. He was determined to capture their hearts and minds as well. And hopefully none of us will ever face such an extreme situation. But actually, I bet most of us can talk of times where it feels like the culture around us, the environment we're in, the workplace we're in, it feels like it's not just out for take our service, but to capture our hearts and minds as well. In Romans 12, the Apostle Paul writes, do not let the world squeeze you into its mold. I don't want to feel squeezed. Sometimes it's a very active squeezing. We can feel that active pressure. I was talking to someone who lived in my neighborhood, worked for a big organization, works across Europe, and there'd been a change of leadership, and apparently it came with a real change in ideology. and lots of people were being fired. And he said to me, it feels like if you're not a true believer, there's no space for you. There's a real sense it came with this kind of pressing ideology. But it can just be a more kind of relaxed thing, a more cultural thing around us. Another person I was speaking to recently said that until they had a baby, most of their friendship group had been Christians, in kind of Christian circles. Then they had a child, and suddenly they found themselves in lots of parents and tots groups and all kinds of things. And suddenly their friendship group completely changed. And they were reflecting that it's actually a whole different way of thinking, speaking, and they'd found it quite hard to resist that kind of leaching in and changing the way that they were thinking. Either way, I think sometimes we often feel this squeeze into the world's mold. So how do we respond to this? How do Christians respond to a world and to authorities who don't honor the Lord? Well, I think there can be some knee-jerk reactions. Generally, when you're oppressed, it's fight, flight, or flex, and those are kind of easy things to kind of jump to. Maybe it's flight, maybe it's fleeing away. Sometimes our reaction is a kind of monastic, where we'll isolate ourselves. If we want to stay holy and pure, then we'll kind of remove as much kind of cultural influence as possible. That could look like all kinds of things. It could be, I'm going to make sure all my friends are Christians, or I'm going to take my kids out of school, or I don't know what it might look like. Now, of course, in some circumstances, this is the right response. There's biblical precedent for saying, actually, my heart and mind are being claimed here. I'm struggling. I'm going to step away. Another response is to fight. Some of us, our response is a bit more like, no, you're not going to change me very much. I'm going to change you. I'm going to go, into my workplace. I'm going to go into my family. I'm going to go into the country. We're going to change this. We're going to use our influence. And of course, again, there's a good biblical side to this. We're called to use our influence, use our voice in society. But the bad side of this is maybe that sense of like, we're in a culture war. And we have to fight this, and we kind of, and sometimes we have to be careful. Of course, the easiest by far, and one we often just fall into, is just flexing. Essentially, just kind of like, I will let this mold shape me. And I imagine that for Daniel, there was a lot of pressure. Yes, okay, he was going to follow God when he was in Jerusalem, but now he's in Babylon. There's no going back. There's all these pressures. I imagine there was a great amount of, a lot of pressure to just say, okay, I'm going to just accept this new reality and make the best of it. And you know what? If that comes with a new faith, fine. Maybe there's even some career opportunities here. It's interesting, though. When we look at Daniel and we ask, how does he actually respond? The answer is kind of none of those, or maybe a bit of all of them, which is much more complicated and difficult, isn't it? But he doesn't have this kind of, just kind of 2D, black and white response. I mean, first of all, we see he's not actually hardline or legalistic about things. He neither kind of totally retreats and flees or sets himself out to be a martyr, nor does he come out fighting. Actually, what we see is he seems to flex quite a lot. Some of us might almost be uncomfortable at some of the things he seems to be willing to accept. He appears, at least at first, and then as we read on in the book, he seems to accept his training and all the reading and all the stuff he has to do. He seems to accept this new role in the regime. He even appears to accept this new name that he's given. It looks at first like he's doing a lot of flexing. But as we read on, we find it's not without limit. And although he is willing to buy in, he's buying in to this, where God has put him, at the same time, he is not willing to sell out. And there is a difference. And he draws a line. We're told in verse 8, Daniel resolved not to defile himself. Daniel resolved not to defile himself, and specifically not to eat the food from the king's table. Why did Daniel draw the line here? It's a bit of an odd place to draw the line, really, sort of think about it. It's a bit like okay, I'm happy to serve as an advisor to Kim Jong-un, but I'm not willing to drink his beer. It's kind of, That says what's going on here. Why the food? Well, often people jump to the conclusion that it must have been something to do with the food itself, that in some ways it would have made him kind of ritually impure. So one suggestion is that pretty much all meat would have been offered to idols at some point. So maybe that means eating the meat would have defiled him. We certainly don't imagine that the Babylonian kitchens would have been keeping kosher laws, keeping Mosaic food laws. So maybe that's a reason for him to stand back from it. The problem with that as the answer is that later on in the book of Daniel, we read that he did eat rich meats and fine wines. So it's unlikely that this is the core of the reason why he refuses it. As a result, many scholars think that much more likely is the fact that this food specifically comes from the king's table. That it is the king's food from the king's table. Later on in chapter 11, you can go and read for yourself. There's another reference to this specific word, which is the sort of the king's rations, the king's food. And there it's implied that eating the king's food kind of involves buying into a certain allegiance to the king. This idea that when you share table fellowship with someone or with the authority, that you're choosing to give your allegiance to them. Whatever the exact importance of the food, Daniel realizes the importance amidst all this pressure of drawing a line and taking a stand on it. And I think at the heart of this whole first chapter is the question of our fundamental allegiance. It's like, what, when you dig all the way to the bottom, who are we serving? As we looked at in Daniel 7 last week, Daniel has an expansive view of what's going on in the world. He knows God is on the throne. He can also recognize that God has allowed other authorities in the world, even though they might be pagan, even though they might be ungodly. He can recognize God's authority on them. So he's willing and able to serve under them. But key for him is that all along, he knows and he's clear that above those authorities, there is another throne. There's a higher court. He's aware of that, and he needs others to know that too, that ultimately he serves the higher throne. This is about ultimate authority. So, a few things for us to observe as we maybe begin to think about this for our own lives. How we respond to the pressures that you and I face. The first thing is this: taking a stand starts in the heart. Taking a stand starts in the heart. It says that Daniel resolved not to defile himself. In other words, at some point he sat himself down. He says in his own heart, this is whom I'm going to serve. This is the king that I follow. And I think very often you and I get tripped up because we never actually do that initial heart work to decide in a new place, a new season, a new workplace, new friendship group. In this place, actually, Jesus, you are Lord. Quite often, I think, without thinking, we just roll into these spaces, and then we end up trying to balance our allegiances, trying to find something. Yeah, of course I want to follow Jesus, but of course I want to, whatever it is, and maybe find a way that kind of balance these things. But Jesus tells us, you can't serve two masters. You will either love one or hate the other, or you'll hate one and love the other. You can't serve two masters. Actually, the place to start is in your own heart, and deciding who has your ultimate allegiance. In 1 Peter chapter 3, it says, in your heart, set apart Christ as Lord. In your heart, set apart Christ as Lord. So maybe you're in a new season at the moment, or maybe there are new pressures. Maybe you're in a new relationship. Maybe you're finding new challenges. Have you started by sitting down with the Lord? And you might come before, the prayer might go something like this: Lord, I don't know what to do in this season. I don't know how to navigate this. I don't know whether it's possible to balance this or whether it's not. But actually, Lord, I want to start by saying, in this season, fundamentally and at rock bottom, I want to honor you. Will you help me do that? I want to honor you first and foremost. The stand starts in the heart. Next, though, we see that if you have decided your allegiance in your heart, you have to ask, where are my red lines in life? If you've decided in your heart to serve the Lord, you then have to decide in your life where those red lines are. Daniel doesn't just kind of resolve inwardly as if faith is just an inward thing. No, he then takes a stand on something visible. And again, I'd say very often we trip ourselves up by just not thinking these things through. Have you ever thought in your work, amongst your neighborhood, or whatever pressures it is, have you ever thought, what would I not do? Where would I not go? Where are the limits? What are the pressures, and how far am I willing to go? And, this might look like different things for different people. Famously, for Gary Grant, who's the owner of the entertainer chain of toy stores, famously for him, it was Sundays. Growing up, he didn't work on a Sunday because that was a part of his faith. And then when he took over a store and then the store grew and grew, he decided actually no one in his chain would work on Sundays. And that has been very costly as one of the big retail days. But it's a stand that he has taken for his faith. I know someone else well who is completely teetotal. Not because they don't believe it's okay to have a drink here or there, but for them, when they became a Christian, it was in a kind of, they were part of a group of friends, part of a subculture where there was a lot of abuse of alcohol. That was a challenge for them. When the Lord saved them, he saved them out of that, and they said, okay, you know what? I'm stepping away from this. I'm symbolically saying I'm shutting the door on that. And that was sort of like a marker in their life. I remember chatting to a former member of this church around the dinner table, telling me a bit of their story. And they'd held a very senior post in a large multinational company. But they were telling me that over the years, they had refused multiple invitations to join the board of this company because, in their words, it was the difference between working hard and work ruling their life. And where do you set that line? But for them, it was like, no, this is a marker. I invested in my work, I've bought in, but I'm not going to sell out. We all have to ask these situations. Missionaries often have to ask, because I come to this new culture, what am I going to engage with? What am I not? The Apostle Paul, fascinatingly, tells the Corinthians, look, you've got this problem around food. If somebody offers you food and it's been sacrificed to idols, but they don't mention it, yeah, just eat it, that's fine. But if they say this is sacrificed to idols, then don't eat it, that's too far. It's this interesting mixture of flex, but then taking a stand. Why do I mention these examples? I imagine some of us are feeling a bit uncomfortable with some of those examples. And maybe it's because some of them feel a bit arbitrary. But here's the thing, these things stop being arbitrary when they become a matter of contested identity or contested allegiance. I think that's the point. Oddly, I think this is why Daniel is happy later on in his career, later on in life, to eat meat and to drink wine. It feels like by then, later on in his career, everybody is clear where he stands. Multiple times he has taken very clear and costly stands for the Lord. It's no longer an issue. But that is not where he is here and right now. Right now, he's a young man. He's been deported. He's in a new place. And he is in a contested space. I mean, first of all, I imagine he's in a contested space in his own heart. He has not necessarily for himself yet decided whether he's going to still follow Yahweh in this new place. And so he's in a fight in his own heart. But also, he's in a place that's contested and his allegiance is being assumed. It is just being assumed by others and by the officials. And so he decides to take a stand here. And I think it's significant the order in which things happen here. In verse 7, and the original language helps us a bit here. In verse 7, we're told the chief official put on Daniel a new name. Chief official put on Daniel a new name. And then verse 8, it says, so Daniel put on his heart not to defile himself. It's this direct response. You see that? They put a new name on him, and so he put on his heart not to go any further, to not defile himself. This is in direct response to contested identity. So here's a question. Maybe it's the question for you today. Where is the world trying to put a new name on you today? Where is the world trying to put a new name on you? Where are those pressures, those normal pressures of life and of culture around us? Where are they going beyond normal and beginning to become a matter of claiming your allegiance or claiming your identity? Could be different things for different people. Maybe it is work hours. You know, it is good and godly and biblical to work hard. But maybe for some of us, there's a battle in our own hearts. It's a contested space. We know, if we're honest, that work has kind of grown and grown, and now really it rules us. And for others of us, it might be that our organization or our boss, you know, like, it's beyond working hard. It's as if there's a claim to our allegiance here. It's a final, it's an absolute thing. And maybe we need to take a stand. I don't know what that might look like. It might look a bit arbitrary to say, no, I'm going to have one day, 24 hours a week, where I will not work as a stand. But to notice that name's been put on us and say, no, I resolve to stand for the Lord. Maybe it is something more political or moral about the situation. A bit like I mentioned before, that's, you know, where the guy was saying, you know, I feel like you have to be a true believer. Maybe you're in a situation like that. I don't know. Where is the world trying to put a new name on you? And maybe it's time to take a stand. The final observation, though, to help us with this, is that it does really make a difference how we make this stand. It really, really does. And I think many Christians get themselves into unnecessary and sometimes even deserved trouble because we take the right stand, but we do it in completely the wrong way. And I think we just need to be aware of that. If we are going to take note of Daniel's courage and his conviction, we should also take note of his tact and his wisdom. Because Daniel is incredibly wise about all of these things throughout the whole book of Daniel. Just pluck out a few things from the passage today. Did you notice that although he takes a stand, first of all, he asks for permission? He doesn't just act unilaterally and decide from nowhere. No, he actually goes and he asks permission. When he does, he approaches the authorities with respect. He honors them. He shows an appropriate deference. He doesn't rub them up or attack them. He recognizes the difficulty that he is putting these officials in. I mean, very often when we take a stand, someone else, it makes life difficult for them. We're asking them to break a policy or to talk to someone else on our behalf. And he recognizes the situation that this official is in. He also comes with a solution, not just a problem. He doesn't just say no. He's thought about an alternative way forward, and he offers that. And then he's willing to give it a trial period. So he is wise and he is tactful. Ultimately, though, this is an outrageous request. Ultimately, this is a dangerous thing to do, and the passage leaves us in no question about the fact that it's not his wisdom that gets him the favor. It is God. God's protection and God's favor is at play. And maybe that's a good place to end. Well, we should be encouraged. The book of Daniel is really positive about Christians, about followers of God being in contested spaces. Again and again, it shows us glimpses of the life-giving influence of the witness that can come from faithful followers of God being in those spaces. But it's also clear with chapter 1 that the place to start is in our hearts declaring that Jesus is Lord. It's not kind of, how can I have that influence? How can I have that witness and then work backwards? How can I, it's to start by saying, Lord, actually, I'm in for you. I'm following you. I will honor you come what may. And I'm going to trust that you will take care of the rest. So in our hearts, will we set Christ apart as Lord?